appetite to continue this kind of programming, come September, once again, we will consider running it. This evening, we have the pleasure of having Conway Fraser, local. Sudbury, born and raised, recently made the move to Waterloo, Gemini award-winning journalist, and he's here to talk about the power of storytelling in business. So I will leave it at that, and because Conway really doesn't need much more of an intro, he takes care of that himself. I'll leave it over to him.
Thank you, sir. So I want to start here. I don't know if anybody recognizes this. This is Falcona Camp up on Nelson Lake, north of Hanmer. So my dad worked at Falconbridge, and back in the 70s and 80s, the kids used to go to summer camp up there, and the miners got to send their kids away for a few weeks of R&R. The company subsidized it, and you went up there and just hung out. It was boys' month in July, girls' month in August, very rustic. You know, no electricity, no flush toilets, anything like that. You had to do your own laundry. Imagine being 6 years old, having to do your own laundry in a tub, in a basin. So that's where I spent pretty well 1 month every summer from the age of 6 till the age of 14. And every night they had this lodge program. They had this lodge that the whole camp would congregate, because it was about 110 kids, and they were sectioned off by age. And so after turning 14, I decided to become a counselor, because I just loved it. They had lodge program. They would get up there and tell stories and plays every night. There was no television, no internet back in the day. I know some of you younger people have a hard time believing that. There was no internet. What did you guys do? We did camp stuff. But there was the storytelling there that was amazing. You'd get around every night, and some cabin counselors would have to be responsible for the entertainment. So we learned how to tell these stories. And I already kind of grew up in a storytelling family. My parents are both Newfoundlanders, and anybody who knows East Coasters, they're all about the stories. And so when I became a counselor, I kind of thought I was a pretty good storyteller. So my first assignment with a buddy by the name of Sean DeLabio, who's another Sudburian, and we were assigned to Junior 1. The cabin was Junior 1. That was 6 and 7-year-olds. So we went in there, and the kids were like, Conway, tell us a story at night. They're all in their beds, you know. We had sprayed the DEET, literally, which you wouldn't do today, to make sure all the mosquitoes were killed. Tell us a story. No, guys, it's time for bed. It's time for bed. Tell us a story. They started chanting. Okay. I walked out of the cabin, and Sean looked at me, and he's known me since he was 6 years old. He goes, don't do it. I said, okay. So I walked out, and I told them the story, these 6 and these 7-year-olds, about the Falcona Camp outhouse monster. And so what happened was, there was 10 years previous, a kid went out to the outhouse, and he was never seen again. And after the police came in and investigated, they concluded that when he sat on the toilet, a monster reached up from the hole in the outhouse and pulled you down. Never seen again. We lost 3 kids that summer, we told them. And so, some kids were crying. Some kids were just hiding. And we moved on. And after that, I was like, I'm not doing that again. At the end of the week, on the Saturday, we packed them up to send them home to their parents. And we're cleaning out they got these cubbies. We're cleaning out the cubbies. And with 3 of the kids, we found bags that they had decided not to go to the outhouse. They decided to go in the bags. And it was at that evil moment that I concluded I had a knack for storytelling. And apparently, I'm waiting for the lawsuit for the therapy sessions to come from the kids. It was 1984, people. It was a very different time. But at that time, you discover the power of storytelling, good and bad. And anybody who's in business, you know, show of hands, who here is in business? Okay. You think about marketing. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about storytelling. So after camp, I went to school. and I started working at the CBC, as Kyle mentioned. And I spent 18 years at the CBC with some of the best storytellers, the Peter Zoskis of the world, and, Rick McInnes-Ray, people who are amazing storytellers. And I had the great benefit of learning from them. And then after doing that for about 18 years, had some success. And one day I was working as a journalist here in Sudbury. And I went out to cover an open house by a mining company. And the mining company, I didn't know a heck of a lot about mining from a technical perspective. I went out to this open house and they had all their engineers, smart guys who know what they're doing, and smart men and women who are doing exploration and building mines. And I went out to this dumb journalist with a journalism degree, and I interviewed them. And I interviewed this guy from exploration, and I said, so, what's important to know here? And he says, well, I'm in exploration. And what's important to know is that right now, when we look around, we've only got about 10 years of ore left in the ground that we know of. And what he meant was, we need to do more exploration. There's a lot more ore in the ground, but right now we have 10 years of reserves. Well, what do you think my story was? My story was, Sudbury's going to be out of nickel in 10 years. Okay? Well, you can imagine I got a call from my news director at about 8 o'clock in the morning saying, what the hell did you do? We're getting flooded from calls. People are like, what's going on? Or should we be selling our houses? All this sort of stuff. Well, it was at that moment that I realized there might be a business in this. Helping companies communicate better. Smart people building smart things, and these are smart people, but helping them tell their stories in a way that regular people understand. So I left. And as they say in journalism, I went to the dark side. When you're a journalist and you go and work in strategic communications or public relations, they say that you've gone over to the dark side. I don't view it as the dark side. I view it as helping companies tell their stories. And over the past 10 years of doing this, we've had a lot of success just by storytelling. I'm not an expert. JP Rains is back there, the head of social media for Laurentian. He knows I don't know anything about social media. Whenever something new comes out, I call JP and say, should I be on this Twitter thing? And I'm a storyteller. I'm not a social media expert. And so through storytelling and storytelling alone, we've helped companies raise millions of dollars. We've helped companies sell product. We've helped companies recruit just through telling stories. And so I'm hoping today that's what we'll share. I know at the end we're going to have some questions. Kyle, what time do we have until 7? So we'll stop at around maybe 10 to 7, quarter to 7 for some questions. All right. So here's the problem. These technical people, smart people doing smart things. This is usually what you end up seeing when they're doing a media interview. This is a bit of a mock video, but watch this. This is typically what you get. So anyways, a little bit of a shot there, but having worked in the media for many years, and Jonathan Munoz here, former reporter from the Northern Life, interviewing technical people sometimes can be frustrating, confusing, because we know you're smart, just have no clue what you're saying. And that becomes a problem when you're telling stories. So Margaret Atwood, as many of you know, talks a lot about storytelling, and she says no one's ever going to build it. Storytelling has been around since the inception of men and caves, and it's bypassed social media and television, and it will keep going. Storytelling is always the content, and content is king. Everything else is just a vehicle for delivering information. And think about it. From the time we're born, we are conditioned to love stories. We listen for stories. Our ears perk up for a story. You ever been in a conversation and someone's trying to make a point and then just say, let me give you an example. The other day, I was at work, and all of a sudden, now I'm interested because I'm hearing a story, right? So we are conditioned from a young age. You look at the impact. You want to know if it works. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Archaeology enrollment went up. Just storytelling in a movie. It was just a movie intended to make money, not intended to help promote archaeology, but archaeology enrollment went through the roof in universities. Journalism. This is a shot from All the President's Men, a movie about the Washington Post investigating Nixon and Watergate. And after this story came out, journalism enrollment in journalism schools went through the roof. After The Social Network, everybody with a hoodie and an iPhone decided they were going to be a tech startup company. That's what happened. Scott Brooks is in the back. He watched this movie, and all of a sudden he decided he was going to do it. But it's the impact. Think about some of us who are of an older vintage. When Bruce Lee started doing movies in the 70s, suddenly everybody wanted to be a martial artist until he realized it was actually really hard, and Bruce Lee's really good. But the ability of storytelling to inspire people and motivate people to do things, to be persuasive, is the most powerful marketing tool that you can use in any way, shape, or form. That's the one I always use. Anybody who knows me, it's like a broken record. Facts tell, but stories sell. You can give me stats and turbo encapulators and all that kind of stuff. Tell me a story to sell it. Make me care. Make me care about what you're talking about. Politicians have been doing it since the beginning of time. They're selling ideas, but they understand their audience. Their audience is voters. They're not selling products, they're selling ideas. And so how often do you see a politician get up? Whether it be Obama, all the way to Trump. Trump does it too, stands up. And he says, I met a business person in Ohio the other day, and he said to me, and they tell stories, because that's what Trudeau does it. That's what Kathleen Wynne does. Doug Ford is doing it right now, telling stories about regular people, regular places. Because no matter what happens, we still like the stories. I don't know if anybody remembers this project. If you need a little more evidence, tangible evidence of the economic value, the return on investment of storytelling. So this former journalist decided he was going to do a little project. They'd get a bunch of pieces of junk that weren't worth more than $1 or $2. They could buy at a flea market or a yard sale. And they took these products and they gave each product to an author or a journalist or a storyteller. And they had to write up the description for the product on eBay. So you're selling a plastic spoon, whatever. Anyways, they ended up taking $128 worth of goods and selling it for over $3,600. They thought maybe it was, a one-time thing, so they did it again with about $400 worth of goods, and they sold $8,000. They made it turn into $8,000 just based on the stories. I'll give you an example. Okay, anybody remember this? This was before the internet, kids. This is a wooden gun with a clothespin, and it had an elastic band, and you would shoot pennies. And that's why your parents are the way they are. And so this is what we did for fun. And it was purchased for $1.50. And somebody went on eBay and told a story, a nostalgic story about the gun and how it got you outside and got you active. And somebody, for just pure nostalgic reasons, bought it for $63. Which, by the way, is a great startup idea for anybody who wants to start. but it has the impact. And I'm emphasizing this because I know some people are skeptical. Like, we just need Google ads and a Facebook page and a website and we'll be fine. But what are you going to put on it? What's your content? So when you're storytelling, I have this discussion all the time with clients. It's not about you. You're not your target audience. So, for example, if you are selling, Guy Venn is here from MNP. He's an accountant. Okay, he's a senior partner over at MNP. He sells accounting services. But Guy knows everything about accounting, so he needs to explain it to people like me who can't add. Right? And so he understands when he's talking to me about accounting, it's not what he knows, it's about what I don't know. And he has to speak in words and language and tell me stories about why this is important in my language, not yours. And this comes back to the technical idea. So understanding your audience is a key part of business development. So how many of you have actually thought about that? Not who your client is, but who's my target audience? What demographic are they? How much money do they have to spend? Why would they want your product? Who are they? Where are they? All these sorts of things. Who's your target audience? And then understanding what it is that they want. And I can't stress this enough. We're going to gloss over this a little bit quickly, but I can spend an entire day and have spent an entire day about identifying target audience. I've been sitting in boardrooms with companies with 8 to 10 people, senior people in this company around the table, and ask one question. Let's go around the table. Who's your target audience? And I can hear 6 or 7 different answers because they've not aligned on who the target audience is and what is our strategic story that we want to tell before they actually get into tactics. Marketing, social media, advertising, all that kind of, those are tactics. Strategy and storytelling, but you can't even think about what your story is until you identify who your target audience is. And you may have multiple target audiences, but understanding them and what they want to hear and sitting down with them and saying, what is it that you want from us? Like, have you ever sat down with your clients and said, are we communicating with you in a proper way? Understanding who your target audience is. We learned that in journalism, because when we were in journalism, we would sit down and we would talk about a story and we would say, why should people care about this? Who would care about this? And through that, deciding who the target audience is. If you haven't done it, sit down with your teams or sit down with your partners and have a fulsome conversation about that. Not tell me, but through each other, talk about as much detail of your target audience and what they want to hear as possible before you even move into your story, your narrative. Okay. So you've identified your target audience, and now we're getting into the idea of how to communicate with them and tell the story. I don't know if anybody's seen this video, but here's a little idea of what it sounds like sometimes being around people in the tech community, as somebody who spends a lot of time around people in the tech community. Can you volume this? So that's not how people talk. But it is how people in tech talk. And I know a lot of you are in startups, so you're maybe entering this space. Do not feel compelled to speak like that because everybody speaks like that. Because real people don't speak like that. That's just a thing. I don't know. It's like everybody's in an Aaron Sorkin movie or something. It's like, that's not how real people speak. Speak the language of your clients, of your target audience, your stakeholders, you're trying to recruit. Speak their language and get in the habit of speaking that language even in your workplace. Because people are like, well, we only speak like that at work. Well, no, if you speak like that 80% of the time, that's how you're going to speak when you go out. You won't be able to help yourself. Come on, show of hands. Who here has at least used one of those phrases at some point? Today? Yeah. Like, I show this video in my media coaching workshop, and I still say those things because you just get wrapped up in that environment. Be cognizant of the actual words you use and the ones that your clients use, because they're very, very different. And a lot of people, especially if you're trying to sell a product or you're trying to recruit talent, they won't necessarily correct you because they don't want to look like they don't know what you're saying. No one wants to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying, because immediately it's like, oh, I'm going to sound stupid. So potential clients, customers, they're not going to correct you. And so if you speak over their heads, and this is how I found it as a journalist anyways, I would go back to the newsroom, and if I interviewed somebody and 50% of what they said was so technical I couldn't make it out, I would just leave it. I wouldn't use it. I would only use the parts that I understood. And sometimes there's really good stuff in the technical. There's really good information in there. You just have to find a way to communicate it. But that's quite normal. So at the end of the day, and we're not done yet, but we're at the point now where through this process you've identified your target audience, you understand the language that they may use. Now what's your story? What does that mean? What's your story? Well, so what makes a good story? People. People make good stories. Not products, not policies, not gadgets, not gadgets. Steve Jobs did not invent the MP3 player. He didn't. It existed. I had one, a little round purple Walkman that held about 3 songs, I think. There were other ones. What he did was first of all, great design, that's one thing, but he told a story. He told a story about counterculture back when, believe it or not, Apple used to be counterculture. And that idea that, screw Big Brother, this is different. He told a story that spoke the language of the people he was trying to attract. And so it worked. And the product took off through storytelling. They just did it differently. They told the story. So what's your story? People. Who are you? What do you do? And why should I care? Again, I'm going to come back to my baseline, which is journalism. These were questions we asked every day. When one of you would call one of us and say, hey, we've got this company. Can you do a story about us? I would say, as rude as it sounds, why should I care? Make me care. You're the owner of the company. If you can't make me care, how am I supposed to make my listeners care, or my readers care, or my viewers care? That's your job. And I will tell you this. You all have a story to tell. Anybody in business has a story to tell. We used to do something when I was at the CBC on slow days where we would just basically randomly pick people and get them to tell it. We'd walk downtown. I remember walking down on Elm Street, stopping complete strangers on a slow news day and saying, "Hey, excuse me, I'm with CBC." They'd come over. "Just curious, what's your story?" That was it. And they'd look at me, "What's your story? What makes you interesting? Talk to me about a struggle you've been through." Because what makes a good story? People and struggle, tension. That's what makes a good story. It doesn't have to be good guy, bad guy, but it can be dramatic tension. It's that idea of struggle. That's what makes a good story. Whether it's Little Red Riding Hood, or The Social Network. There's a struggle. So what's your story? What's your struggle? Anybody who's in small business knows what it's like to struggle. In many ways, I'm like you. I didn't start a tech company. I didn't start a startup. But in 2009, I walked away from my full-time job at the CBC. Didn't get laid off. Didn't get fired. Walked away, 4 kids, and started this company as a small business. And I know what it's like. You work nights, and you work weekends, you work all the time, and you're always on, and you're worried about where the next paycheck's going to come from, and it's an eat what you kill mentality. It's not easy. I've said this before here. If running a business was easy, everyone would do it. It's hard. And we know the failure rates. I'm not going to give you the stats. So I'm coming back to, what's your story? If you're in business, there's a story to tell. Don't devalue yourselves. So what is your story? What is your struggle? If I'm going to invest in your company, and we come back to your target audiences. Maybe your target audience is investors. Maybe you're looking for money. Maybe you're looking for talent to come work for you for little money and some equity in the company. Maybe you're looking for a government grant. Don't kid yourself. Writing a government grant is all about storytelling. That executive summary in the grant application that you kind of gloss over, that's the most important part. Because the bureaucrats, a lot of them are political, not technical. They read the technical part and their eyes gloss over. So they go back to the executive summary. So that's the kind of thing people will gloss over, but it is so important to whether or not your grant application gets to the next step. Anybody who's ever dealt with a government grant application knows that. Sometimes they learn it the hard way. Why were we rejected? Because you don't know who your target audience is. I had a client who, you know who the client is, engineering company, and had to go out and do a procurement pitch to the government to provide government services. Engineering company. A lot of money on the line. And looked at their approach before they brought me in, and I looked at it. It was all engineering. And I said, "Who are you pitching to exactly?" And they're like, "Well, the procurement people." Who are the procurement people? Well, the procurement people. No, who are they? What are their backgrounds? Are they engineers? Well, no, they're not engineers. But look at your proposal. Your proposal is customized to engineers, and you're pitching to bean counters and political appointees, and that happens in government, right? And so we reworked the application, and they had success with it. Now, anybody can do that. You don't need to hire people to do that. You just need to know the audience and what your story is. So why are you doing? What makes you different? These are the questions that our technical people have problems with, because whether you're an engineer or in healthcare or mining, you deal in almost absolutes, black and white. And storytelling is the gray area. Storytelling is that 80% in between the black and the white. And it's the influential part. It's what we call in our business the spin. You never lie, but you tell a tale. You tell a story. And so you have one. What is your unique selling proposition? Why should I invest in your company versus that company? Now, keep in mind, people invest in people. They don't just invest in companies. They come in and they want to see you. They want to know how committed you are to the company. How passionate are you about what you're doing? Am I going to invest money in your company and 6 months from now you're going to get bored and join the Midway? Are you going to go back to a government job? Are you going to go back to the mines or whatever? How invested are you? Tell me, your investment, your story, your commitment, your passion. That's what storytelling is. It's all about, and so think about that. People invest in people. In the same way, when people quit companies, they usually don't quit companies, they usually quit people. And people being hired, they go work for people. They don't go work for companies. Maybe when you're fresh out of school. But when you get into a point in your career where you have value and experience, you're selective in who you're going to go work for. You want to look for those people. So it's that storytelling that whether you're pitching your company or you're pitching yourself in a job interview, I help a lot of people get ready for job interviews. And it's the first thing I say, what's your story? I ask that question in job interviews when I've sat on selection committees, and the first question I ask is, so what's your story and why should I care? In a job interview. You want to ask a question that puts people on their heels right away? Ask that one. What's your story and why should I care? So you have your target audience. Now you've developed your story. And you're ready to go. Well, now it's time to perform. Now we're talking about the art of storytelling, not just having a story, but the art of it. It's like writing a script. You can have the best writer in the world write a beautiful script. And if the actors aren't good, if the performance isn't good, well, the movie's no good. Imagine if, Martin Scorsese wrote Goodfellas, but instead of having, Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta and Robert De Niro, they had the cast from Malcolm in the Middle, right? It's all, or Ernest. Anybody remember Ernest? But that idea that the performance matters. So you've got your target audience. You have your main message. Now you're ready to go, and you're ready to tell your story. This is the part that people forget. It's all about your passion and your body language. Now, people may know Terry O'Reilly quotes the stat we use. Terry's actually a Sudbury boy, for people who don't know. But it's called nonverbal communication. We call it body language, but it's not just body language. People will forget what you said, but they will not forget how you made them feel. And so you might be nervous. You need to get over those nerves to know your story, to get in there. If you're pitching to an investor, to get in there and tell your story with passion and make me believe. So that's the nonverbals. And so if you're going to meet with, for example, a potential investor, and I know people don't do this. Even my clients don't do it. Do you practice the pitch? Do you actually sit down and say, okay, one of your friends, I want you to hear this pitch, or you need to really work through this. Or do you go in cold and just do it cold? You don't understand, they're actually sizing you up. Experienced investors, they're like poker players. They don't even have to look at their cards. They look at you. They look around your office. They see if your employees are happy, or if you have employees. They see the working environment. They will look at the numbers at some point. They will. They're not going to invest in you without looking at your numbers. But the first thing they're doing before they even look at their cards is they're reading you and your story and your passion. And so all these body language aspects all come down to that concept of believing in what you're selling. And that makes a great story. Like in the beginning when I talked about telling that story about the kids who no longer wanted to use the outhouse, you truly believed that I'm a bad human being. And that's probably true. Good belief system. Authenticity equals credibility. If you're coming off as authentic in what you're doing, then you're instantly credible. Has anybody here ever invested in a company? What do you look at? Beyond the numbers.
And I look at what's the community support for whatever they're doing. So usually I look at money.
Do you ever meet the people?
I have not in the case.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're talking about investment in a high. Got it.
I'm talking about companies where they might have a couple of operations and then now they have other deposits.
But you do look at, and this is a good point, you also look at see what news stories have been done on them. Right, you look, and so it matters. So, and we're going to talk about the media a little bit at the end and how to build relationships there. But that idea that they will look at the news stories that have been done on you. And news stories are done by people who have stories. And so if you have stories that get in the media, those are things that investors are looking at. Don't kid yourself, government looks at them too. So we talked about people doing business with people. Here's a short little pitch. I'm hoping the volume's okay. But this was a really good pitch on Dragon's Den about a guy who came off as authentic and really sold what he was doing, and it became believable.
Is the mobile app for preschools, daycares, and families. We are completely revolutionizing early education. Now, I believe all of us are parents here want to ask, when you go home after a long day and you ask your kids, what did you learn at school today? Does this sound familiar? This is the experience for millions of parents across America every single day, especially for younger kids. You've been a part of your little human being for 6, 8 hours a day, and that is what you get. You want to be a part of their day. You want to ask for everybody when you get home. You can't. You got it. Friendship. On the other side, on the school side, it's no better. In addition to actually educating our kids, teachers are managing a ton of paperwork. Let's face it, you're actually managing parents. And on top of that, are you running a business? The system is broken, and Brightwell is the solution. Let's jump in and take a look at how Brightwell works. So with Brightwell, you just immediately check kids into the mobile app, and log activities and assessments during the day. You can send quick updates, and we can even manage their business all in one place. We're just seeing an amazing amount of photos every single day on Brightwell. And this is the reason you take it, you tag it, and you are absolutely done. And now we're going to look at the teacher app. So this is the teacher's room. We're going to click on activities to volunteer. And this is all being done on paper. So we've taken it and combined it, made it super fast, super easy. So we're going to click on nap here. And then we're going to tag 3 kids who just went down for a nap. The key about Brightwell is we're saving teachers time. We actually have measurably more time to give kids every single day. Now we're going to flip over real quick to the parent experience. So let's jump to the mobile app. This is actually my little girl's screen up, and this is her day. And as you can see, I get to not only what she's doing, but what she's learning. So when I come home, I can actually have a conversation with her about it. My connection with my little girl is so much deeper because of Brightwell. And by the way, the Nobel Prize update is a very short photo like this. So this is a unique opportunity to build a massive business that has a massive impact on people's everyday lives, and that's something that we hear every day. So I hope you're joining Serena and our team to bring Brightwell to every preschool, every daycare, and every family across the globe. I'm just telling you this platform is that short as that was happening. Yes, how much should I pay for it? Right now, you're paying nothing. Brightwell's free today. When we have a remark for you, I can go and pay monthly for that. The parent will pay it, or you will pay the administrator or the will the parent ever pay? Not today. We're building a platform. Still have opportunity to add value to parents down the road. Except you can't advertise that. Correct. We have no intention to advertise. Right? You can advertise to the parents all you want. You don't want to think of the ton of money you can advertise with that. No way. No, and we have no intention to. So let me walk you through what Brightwell looks like. So we started with a pilot in fall 2014. Yeah, so we got 10 schools in a pilot. Literally no problem. So we worked with them, we listened to them, we understood their needs, and June of this year, we launched publicly at Brightwell. We went from 10, and then now we have 2,500 schools. We're in every state across the country. Wow, I get a lot of stuff. First, I just wanted to say that when you look at other industries, all of these industries have really great dedicated software that's provided by very large companies. This is a massive market that doesn't have that. So that's what we see ourselves fitting in.
They just raised $10 million. The Sharks invested. They just raised another 10, and they are off to the races. But the tech is interesting. But what sold it, especially for television, but what really sold it were the stories. He related to the people, his audience, and he told his own story. He told a story about his daughter. And he related that pitch. You watch it now and you go, oh, of course, that's how you'd pitch it. No, trust me, I watch a lot of pitches just for purposes of using it in training and talks. And that's a rarity, because what did he come off as? Authentic. You believed what he was saying. It was credible. And maybe other people have pitched a similar kind of service, but he's the one that got the investment. Yeah. There's a need, but I'm sure other people have pitched the need. Like there's always, people are pitching all the time different ideas, but it's the way he pitched it and the storytelling. And it matters. It's not just always about the numbers. If I were investing in that guy, I would say, I believe this guy is 100% committed to this company, like fully. Like this isn't a guy who just jumps from pitch to pitch. There's absolutely a need. But can you believe tech has been around? That kind of tech has been around for years, and this is the first time anybody's successfully done this. I know you're all searching now to load the app, right? It is. No. It's true. But for me, what I liked about it and the purposes of this talk was the authenticity that came through him telling a story about his daughter. That in particular moment just grabbed me. I was like, this comes out of need. That came out of need for him. So anyways, that was just one example of what I liked. So we've talked about this before. Everybody focuses about the different, return on investment and viral videos and search engine optimization. All these things are really, really important. But it doesn't mean dang thing. And I never say dang, but only because there are kids in the room. It doesn't mean a dang thing without content, without a story. And a lot of people now are into content marketing. That's the new thing. That's different. That's just using good words and writing. I'm talking about telling your story. So these things are important. And I don't want to slip over them too fast. But make sure your foundation is solid, really solid, before you get into this area. Anybody who has worked in social media at a high level knows the most frustrating thing can be when you're dealing with somebody who wants you to implement a strategy for them of what their content is. You have a Facebook page. That's great. What are you putting on it? Hey, we're selling this. Hey, buy this. Hey, look at this. YouTube videos that other people have done. What's your story? If you're going to have a Facebook page, what are you going to put on it? What's your content? Is it in keeping with the spirit and character of your company and your organization? Everything. You always have to be on brand. What does on brand mean? From my point, always telling stories with a unified, singular voice across all of these spectrums. You can't look at the video that you guys do and say, that kind of doesn't jibe with the Facebook page that you have. So it's all coming back to the main foundation. Third-party testimonial. So when you talk about storytelling, it can be difficult to develop a good story. Do you know what's easy, low-hanging fruit in storytelling? Getting other people to tell your story. People that you've helped. It's the cheapest, in my opinion, the highest return on investment way to market through storytelling is to get other people who you have helped with your company or you personally, and getting them to do testimonials and tell their story. I engaged Lynn Bullock and she helped me with this, and we saw an immediate return on investment and our company took off, and we snagged an investor because of the work she did. It's like, well, that's great because, people can talk about how great they are, but when other people talk about how great you are, that is the kind of content storytelling that is effective. I can tell you that I probably get 90% of my new business from third-party testimonials. People whom I've helped, friends, clients who go off and say, let me tell you how he helped, right? It's the same for you. Don't be afraid to ask people, hey, can you really help me? I know we helped you out on that. You said some nice things. Could we possibly, get you on video saying that? You don't have to bring in a video company and pay them $5,000. Open up your iPad. Go buy a $70 tripod at Henry's. And you don't have to be, Scorsese here. You just need good content of people telling a story about what you've done. Now, make sure it's authentic. We've all seen inauthentic third-party testimonials. This video spoofs it, but it's really not too far off some of the overly scripted third-party testimonials that we've seen for some companies.
This year, Chevy received more J Power Initial Quality Awards than any other car brand. What do you think about that? I am surprised that it's Chevy. I have no idea what initial
Make sure they're authentic. I'm going to briefly talk about the media, because we've talked about all the other avenues and vehicles for delivering information. When you're starting, and a lot of you, most of you, I think, are startups. You're just getting going. You don't have a lot of budget for marketing and that sort of stuff. I come back to what I said earlier. You have stories, and stories that media want. And Jonathan knows this when he's at the Northern Life. It's really tough being a journalist these days. The number of journalists in Northern Ontario and Sudbury is probably down 2/3 from what it was 15, 20 years ago. And Lynn knows that too. She worked at CTV. And so they need stories. Back in my day, back when you had to walk to school both ways uphill in snow, we actually went out. We went out to delis, Frank's Deli downtown before it was a cool deli and before it closed again. And we'd go down because that's where all the lawyers hung out. And we'd just sit around and listen to the lawyers talk and get story ideas, because we had time back then, because we had resources. And you'd call people and go have coffee with sources. Nowadays, journalists are really straddled to their desks because of workload. They don't want to be there, trust me. They want to be working. They want to be out discovering. But there's so much workload. So now they need the stories to come to them. There was a time when journalists would go out and they'd hear about something like this. Like, if I'm a journalist and I heard about this event, I would come not for me. I would come for all of you. I go, there's stories. Lots of stories in this room. Ton. Every one of you has a story. And so with the media, I'm not talking about the Globe and Mail. I'm talking about getting a little bit of traction. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call CTV and call Northern Life, call CBC, call Sudbury Star and say, hi, I'm so-and-so. We have this business and this is what we do. And I think it's an interesting story, but obviously I'm biased. You don't need to hire a PR guy. You don't need to hire a spin. If you're a big company, you need to hire people like that, because journalists immediately put up walls to big companies. But if you're a starting company, you'd be amazed how much journalists would pay interest in. Yeah, you're not going to be the front page of the Northern Life. You're not going to be the lead story on the CTV News. But, maybe you'll be featured in a Sunday night newscast profile when they're looking to fill the newscast. There's not a lot happening. They want your stories. But make sure you have your story before you go out. And don't worry that you're not an expert, media-trained executive. They actually don't want that. They want your authenticity. They want you. Because they speak to trained spin doctors every day. And you only have a short window, because I'm sure every one of you is going to be running a billion-dollar company in 3 years, right? And so at that point, the media is not going to want to talk to you, because then you're just going to be Mark Zuckerberg. I'll come back to and end on this. The media, more than anybody, hates jargon. This is a short clip of real journalists talking about tech jargon. Anybody here activating? No? You've used those? Think about the successful business people that you read about, that you hear about. They're all telling stories. Elon Musk is a great storyteller, very underappreciated as a storyteller. If you want to see authenticity and see him telling stories, go on YouTube and watch some of the stuff he does, where he just gets into like really authentic, fulsome conversations with people in the crowd at tech conferences. And you're just like, this guy is worth, on paper, a lot of money, and he's just having a chat with some like coder from Stanford for 10 minutes about whether or not we're all living in a what's the word? Simulation. I watched him have a whole 10-minute conversation with a guy about whether or not we're actually here right now, or if we're all living in a simulation. And it was engaging. And he talked about having this conversation with his brother in a hot tub. And I remember that. I don't remember 80% of the conversation, but I remember that. Okay. Questions? Awesome. That's so good. No questions? Or so bad, there's no questions. Yes?
So how much of storytelling is done with the explicit act of telling people your story? How much of it is implicit what you don't say what you do?
I'm not sure I understand.
So things like the curated images that we maintain for ourselves and stuff, the kind of our PR, let's say. That's kind of an implicit kind of image that we keep to others and kind of tell our stories in kind of non-direct ways. Is that form of storytelling?
Well, it's a tactic for delivering. What you're talking about is a vehicle for delivering, stories. But at the core base, before you even get there, you have to agree as a team as to what your story is going to be. And everybody has to be aligned. So it is a form of delivering a story. But storytelling in its root form is sitting around as a team, even if that team's only 2 people, and saying, it's not your pitch, by the way. I'm not talking about an elevator pitch. That's different. I'm talking about beyond the elevator pitch. You give the elevator pitch and they're like, I'm kind of interested. Tell me more. Okay. Well, let me tell you a story about why I did this. And that was the difference, again, coming back to the Steve Jobs thing. He didn't sell what they were doing because that already existed. He sold why they were doing it. So why do you do it?
The difference between the job and the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and your passion. You're starting companies. So this is like akin to self-mutilation, starting your own business. Self-torture. Why would you do this? I've done it. Passion leads to suffering? Absolutely. Well, exactly. So you have the ingredients to tell a good story, but you actually just have to think about it. We don't stop and think about it. Unless you're in the business. You don't stop and say, what is my story and why should I care? Why should anybody care about this? So I wondered that when I started this business. Why would anybody care about this? But, it's very rewarding to see people come out and listen to some buffoon talking about storytelling, because clearly it matters to you. You understand that there's something there. And I wish this was a science. I wish I could come in here and say, okay, guys, I have a system I've developed here for storytelling. A plus B equals C equals dollars. It's not that easy. It is a process of self-discovery. You have to really think about this stuff and try the story out and be passionate about it. Don't be afraid to be passionate. I think that's a Canadian thing. I have American clients. They are passionate, over the top passionate, sometimes Ringling Brothers passionate. But somewhere in the middle between the Americans and the British, where we come from, I think are Canadians. And you can be passionate. It's not illegal to be passionate. We're not Brits. The Brits are so stoic. You can be a little bit passionate about what you're doing. What you're doing, you're putting a lot of sweat for very few dollars in the early years with a high failure rate. These are all the ingredients of a great story. And the journalists, and there are former journalists in the room here, will agree. This is a great cocktail for a good story. So, anyways,
like the what other things do you do for the message to make sure that it is persuasive, especially the sentence? People that don't necessarily trust what you're saying.
In communications, we just call that spillage. You're just not going to convince all the people all the time. So it's a fair question because I've had a lot of clients do this. How do we convince these people? I swear to God, this has happened. So, JP knows this. Somebody left us a negative Google recommendation, a Google assessment, whatever they call it. I was like, I have seen companies assemble boardrooms of people to deal with, a bad review on Google by some guy in his mom's basement with a tinfoil hat, right? Who's just I'm angry at everybody. And you go and look and they have like 800 negative reviews of everything. But I've seen entire boardrooms assemble around. So I call that spillage. There are some people you're just not going to convince. So you have to ask yourself from a communications perspective, do you want to spend 90% of the time convincing 10% of the people, or do you want to focus on the low-hanging fruit? And I've always said from a communications and storytelling perspective, if you spent more energy on the people who believe in your product and invested that time and not waste all the time over here with the negative, which we inherently do, that there's way more fruit to be had there. I don't know if that answers your question, but my general answer is ignore them. Especially in startup phase, because you have limited resources and limited time, and don't worry if someone said something bad about you on Facebook. Seriously, that can be a drainage for you.
You mentioned, I guess you bring it over social media real quick. I follow the company on social media, and the one thing about storytelling, you mentioned that people like to see who you are, your story in the background. Now, is there a line that cross that's a little too far and a little too open? For instance, let's say I'll follow an electrician on Instagram. They're posting pictures of them with their family on their company's profile. And it's like, okay, well, what does this have to do with electricity? Or is that good storytelling about, there's people behind this company? Things like that.
It may be, using that example, that may be a valiant attempt at trying to show that we're a family business or something. But there has to be a reason other than, hey, I'm at figure skating with my kids and here's a picture. If it's a family picnic or a family event or a family day at the business. So in a situation like that, without knowing, I would say they're kind of getting near the puck. They're getting there. They're feeling out their brand, and maybe it's a family, maybe it's like Tate Electric or something like that. It's like an electric company run by a family, and maybe they're thinking, we really want to compete with the big companies by selling ourselves as a family. There's inherent trust and, wholesomeness associated with a family business idea, but their just execution seems to be wrong.
All right, so you would recommend as a startup that they go too personal with posting things on, let's say, Instagram on your company profile?
I would say, and we're dealing with this at a very kind of peripheral level, but generally speaking with a startup, I think it's hard to communicate a startup as a family business, and without leaping to conclusions that may scare away investors. Because you know what an investor wants? They want you to have a nice balanced lifestyle as long as you can work 90 hours a week on the tech startup. So I get the idea, but I'd say it may have a chilling effect on some investors. Some may be like, I love that about you. That's fair, but you've got to pick your narrative. But these are great questions to be asking, because what would that impact be? And if you know people who invest in tech startups, ask them, hey, we're thinking about doing this. I need you to be honest. What do you think? Like I said, my initial response is it might have a chilling effect on people.
Can you tell your story too much? Because I have an example. I don't want to mention the name, but it's a relatively new company in Sudbury, and I see them constantly on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, everywhere, in the newspaper. I'm like, I'm sick of it. But that could be me. I don't know. Can you do it too much?
Well, I'm not a marketing expert, but I can say that I come back to the old story of the boy who cried wolf. The problem is, if you want to cut through the white noise, and right now with everything that's out there, all of the information and all of the social media and all the online media and all the video content and content marketing, your objective is not to tsunami people with information, but it's to cut through the white noise. So how do you cut through them? I'll take one good story in one media outlet versus a one paragraph brief in all of the media outlets in town. So I have clients sometimes who say, we want to put a news release and get all the media to cover it. And I say, instead of blanket, and I'm using this as an analogy for marketing, instead of blanketing all the media with a story that is not worthy of a news release, why don't you call one reporter and pitch it and see if they're interested in a human interest story, and maybe we'll get one good story. And if they say no, try the next media outlet. So for marketing, I think it's the same thing. And I'm not a marketing expert. There are some people here who are definitely experts, but I would say a tsunami approach is not the best approach. And if you were a startup company and I were looking at maybe investing in you or bringing you on, I would say, do you have so much time on your hands that all you're doing is blogging and social media all day? I need you making money. Right. Now, I'm being very cognizant of the audience, right? Startup companies, people who are starting, versus if I were talking to Google and Coke and all, I'd be like, no, tell your story everywhere. It's all about a multifaceted approach and having your story. But that's a different game than what you guys are in. So I would tend to agree for a company starting out, it would be, it would show not a good handle on resources. Is the best way. I'd be like, how are you managing your limited resources?
So my other question is, when you have a sea of possibilities of where to tell your story, how do you choose? What avenue do you take?
Depends on your target audience. So that's why the target audience section, I really went into that because it is so important. That's your base. So I can't answer that question until I know your target audience. Is your target audience 55-year-olds? Is your target audience 22-year-olds? Are you looking at high net worth? Are you looking at, people on pensions? That sort of thing. Like the target audience is so important to answering that question. I don't think there's just a black and white answer to it.
What if I'm an introvert and I don't tell my story really well? Do you recommend hiring somebody to tell your story, or do you recommend avenues better storytelling?
I think I would say you need to grow. You can be an introvert, but I'm not saying you've got to stand up at TechCrunch and pitch, but you do have to get comfortable with selling. If you are running a company, you have to get used to selling, especially in the beginning when you can't afford salespeople. You're the person doing it. So you can be an introvert. I don't recommend hiring people to be spokespersons. You lose the authenticity. You're the person I'm interested in, right? You're the person, you're the guy bootstrapping the company. That's who I want to talk to. I don't want to talk to some hired PR spokesperson who you've hired. One, you immediately lose your authenticity because most people don't like people like me. They don't like PR flax, right? That's why we tend to stay in the background for the most part, unless we're speaking at a public event. And it's the authenticity of you delivering that story. So you can be an introvert, but you may be surprised to discover you're not an introvert, especially when it comes to something you're passionate about. Speaking about something you're passionate about becomes very, very easy. Right? And most of us are great communicators when we're at the dinner table with friends. So just think of the people you're communicating to as just a bunch of friends. But it's okay to be an introvert, but you have to sell your company, right? And it's tough to do that if you have to bring people in to speak on your behalf. It's just a resource you don't have when you're starting out a company, right? So.
Somebody to hire? Is that what you're asking? Should you hire somebody to write your story, help you write your story? Is that it?
No, more telling. Or should you try?
Well, why? But it doesn't hurt to get somebody like yourself to sit down and actually write that story.
You know what? And I've said this before. I would never starting out a company, never ever recommend hiring someone like me. It's not a good use of money. When you're in the beginning, you get a lot of leeway as startups. You get a lot of slack. You get the opportunity to not be perfect. Professional communicators for startups are pricey. There are a lot of resources online. NORCAT has resources online. There are resources to get you through the early years. You have an opportunity. When you're a startup company, people give you slack. It's kind of like being on a new job for the first 6 months. People aren't going to give you too much trouble if you didn't follow the right system or do this or, didn't do things the way they're used to. You get a little bit of a honeymoon period. And as startups, that's part of the struggle. So I would just say, I always tell people, save your money as a startup for your IP and your lawyers and your incorporation and making sure your accounting's good and all that kind of stuff. Save the money for that. And then when you become a $1 billion company, I'll give you my business card and come. When you become a big company. But in the beginning, there's enough resources online. And you know what? You'd be surprised how helpful people would be. I take probably 2 or 3 meetings a month with startups in Waterloo, and I know they're never going to be a client, at least not anytime in the near future. Because, I'm a startup. I was a startup in a way, not a tech startup, but I'm happy to sit down. I usually tell them, you buy lunch, you got an hour of my time, I'll tell you whatever. And what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And usually I said, bring a notebook and glean whatever you can from it. And speak highly of me. That's all I ask. Just speak highly of me. If it works. If it doesn't work, don't mention me. But you'd be surprised how gracious people are. There are a lot of people in the tech community. But it's a good question, though. Both are good questions. Yeah. No, absolutely. All good?
All right, awesome. So thank you, Conway.
Thank you, sir.
It's fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
You might hang around, so if you're a little shy to ask some questions right off the bat here, then you might be circling around.